In this lecture, we're going to begin talking about one of the oldest civilizations in the world, that of Egypt. So to begin, we're going back to our handy map of the world. We are here in North America. We have just finished talking about various civilizations in the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, and now we're going to be moving down to this part of North Africa right here, where we have this area which will be known as Egypt. So here's Egypt in relation to Mesopotamia, that land between the two rivers that we've just finished talking about. Egyptian history is typically divided into the following 5 time periods. We have what's called the Old Kingdom, lasting from about, that little C stands for circa, which means about, so about 3050 BC to 2190 BC. Then we have the First Intermediate Period, which lasts from about 2190 to 2061 BC. Then we have the Middle Kingdom, which lasts from about 2061 to 1665 BC, followed by the Second Intermediate Period, which lasts from about 1664 to 1570 BC. And finally, we have the New Kingdom, which lasts from about 1569 to 1081 BC. For reference to our past Mesopotamian civilizations, King Sargon of the Akkadian Empire reigned from around 3050 BC. So that would put him during the time of the Old Kingdom of Egypt. Hammurabi of Babylon, by contrast, was around from about 1792 to 1750 BC, which would put him during the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. Egyptian civilization is going to exist along the Nile River, which you can see here in this satellite photo from space. This green area all the way along down the river through this arid desert that surrounds it. It is believed that sometime between 5000 and 4000 BC, a massive drought occurred, driving Saharan African people, so from places like over here, toward the Nile River in order to sustain their lives. We are eventually going to have 2 different kingdoms forming out of this. We have Upper Egypt in the south, so the south, which is down here, is known as Upper Egypt. And then in the north we have what's called Lower Egypt. Now you would think that it would be the opposite, right? Because this is up and this is down. So why then is this considered Upper Egypt and this Lower Egypt? Well, it's because the Nile River actually flows in a northward direction. And so upper refers to further up the river, and Lower Egypt refers to further down the river in this area. The Egyptians are going to rely on the Nile for all of their irrigation. That's how they're able to exist in this desert environment. They're able to grow things like dates, vegetables, grass for feeding animals, and grain, which they use for making bread and also beer. This abundant production is going to make Egypt very wealthy, and there's going to be a lot of trade both by land and by sea. The Egyptians also mined for metals out in the desert. The desert further serves as a defensive barrier against most of Egypt's enemies, except for the Numidians, who are down south of Egypt. But the Egyptians are soon going to surpass them in power. The first ruler of the United Kingdom of Egypt is going to be this guy depicted here named King Narmer. King Narmer is sometimes equated with a guy named Menes, who is the first king of Egypt as listed in the Greek chronology of Egyptian history. King Narmer, or Menes, whatever you want to call him, he unites the 2 kingdoms of Egypt, that Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, into one unified kingdom around 3050 BC. And he begins calling himself the King of the 2 lands. The King of the 2 lands is King Narmer. After his death, a series of strong kings solidifies this unification, and Egypt becomes the first really united country. United country, as opposed to a city-state, which is just one city controlling the surrounding countryside, or an empire, which is a collection of independent states brought together under one ruler, but that don't have a whole lot else in common. Egypt becomes the first really united country that has a unified culture under one unified ruler. This then is the beginning of the Old Kingdom of Egypt. The Old Kingdom rulers make their capital at the city of Memphis, which is the first capital of Egypt and is situated just a little ways south of the modern-day Egyptian capital of Cairo. In the later 3000s BC, the Old Kingdom began to collapse. We're not sure exactly why, but possibly it was due to the Nile River not flooding, because the Nile was supposed to flood annually and irrigate and fertilize the soil, and having it not do so could cause a loss of the king's authority, as we will discuss later on. Regardless of the reason, the kingdom begins to break apart, and regional governors become independent rulers. This is called the First Intermediate Period, which lasts from 2190 to 2061 BC. Now, these names that we're using, it should be recalled, they are not the names that the Egyptians themselves used at this time. These are terms that the modern-day historians and archaeologists use to describe these time periods. It's kind of like in the more modern times, we have World War I and World War II. And people back during World War I didn't refer to it as World War I because, for one reason, there wasn't a second one yet. So these are terms that the Egyptian people didn't wake up and say, it's nice to be living in the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. They didn't use those terms. These are terms used by modern-day historians and archaeologists to describe these time periods in retrospect. After the first intermediate period, I should say, we have the rise of the Middle Kingdom, which comes about when, over time, the Egyptian kings are able to reassert their authority through military conquest. So through military conquest, they reassert their authority and take control back from those regional governors. Trouble arises again, though, when large numbers of foreign Semitic peoples from the eastern Mediterranean coast migrate into Egypt. So people related to the Hebrews migrate into Egypt. By this time, the Egyptian kings of the Middle Kingdom had weakened again, and so these foreigners take advantage of the situation and kind of take over running parts of Egypt. So they become powerful, and they take over parts of the Egyptian government and start running things there. The Egyptians call these people the Hyksos, which means the rulers of the foreign lands or the rulers of the foreign countries. The Hyksos introduced things like olive trees into Egypt, and they also expanded the use of chariots. The time of the Hyksos rule is known as the Second Intermediate Period. The Second Intermediate Period, this time of Hyksos rule. But nobody likes to be ruled over by foreigners. I mean, how would we feel if Canada decided to start sending people into our country and they took over our government and began ruling over us? We'd be kind of bitter about that, I think. And so once again, the Egyptian rulers become strong. The Egyptian rulers become strong. Led by the city of Thebes, they manage to reunite the country. They take back control and they expel the Hyksos rulers, leading to the establishment of the new kingdom of Egypt, which is going to be the most powerful and the most imperialistic of all of the Egyptian kingdoms. The New Kingdom pharaohs established a strong military based largely on mercenaries. They also established diplomatic relations with neighboring kingdoms, with kingdoms such as Assyria and Babylon. The New Kingdom pharaohs, as I said before, were very imperialistic. They were warrior pharaohs. They were leaders in time of war, and they were conquerors who aggressively expanded their kingdom. And under the New Kingdom pharaohs, Egypt gains vast wealth from a very vigorous trade. They traded things such as wine, they traded for things, I should say, such as wine and olive oil and painted pottery and so on, from places as far away as Greece, for example. We also see over time, especially during the New Kingdom, people from other lands like Mesopotamia or early Greece migrating to Egypt and settling down there, giving us a very diverse population, especially in the northern areas of Egypt. And we will discuss that a little bit next lecture.